Okay, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai ki te hui o te committee rātonga rangatōpu me te rautaki e tēnei rā. Welcome everyone to today's Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee meeting. We'll just bring up the emergency procedures on the screen for those of you who are here in the room. In the event of a fire, please, or other emergency, please follow the instructions of our staff. And just a reminder for those of you who have mobile phones, please switch those to silent for the meeting. Thank you very much. And we'll just change now to our opening karakia tīmatanga, me karakia tātou. Whakatake te hau ki te uru, whakatake te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Now, just looking at a couple of apologies. Actually, we're down to one now, which is from Councillor Tupou for lateness. He'll be joining us, I think, on half an hour. So just with that apology, have a second, please. And Councillor Morgan, all in favour? I declare that apology accepted. That brings us to public comment. We have one speaker in person today, Joe Clendon. Kia ora, Joe. Joe is speaking to item 6, the parking strategy, on behalf of herself and also on behalf of David Tripp, who could not attend, and I sent David's written submission around to members earlier in the day. Kia ora, Joe. You have 3 minutes to speak for yourself, and then we'll see if there are any questions for you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for letting me speak. So, from David, my apologies for not being present in person. I'm on a plane going to Christchurch to collect my mum on her discharge from hospital. I'm grateful to Joe for reading this message. Don't shoot her. Your parking strategy, which is what we're talking about today, provides a good toolkit and process for decisions how to allocate parking space for cars, which is undoubtedly important. That's my editorial comment. It needs to be broadened in 2 important ways. Firstly, the policy only applies to cars on the grounds that bike parking is generally not on the street. This misses the point. We should only be making decisions about car parking after having taken into account the needs of all modes of transport. As it stands, the policy continues to be car-centric, which is a problem that's plagued our transport system for decades. A good example is the consultation about parking at Nainai Pool, and rather than asking what do all users need to get to the pool and how could we encourage other modes, the consultation only asked about car parking. So you've got a predictable response about parking. I'm summarising a wee bit as I read. Secondly, the most important issue with parking is whether higher priority users of the road corridor need the space instead, and if so, how does this happen? Consider the painful process we've been through for a decade trying to get a cycle path on Knights Road or bus priority lanes on the Esplanade. This parking policy should give you a clear process for ensuring that the higher priority users of transport corridor are always considered robustly when parking issues are being assessed. And the policy as it stands doesn't do that, which is inconsistent with the integrated transport strategy, in which you agreed that we should break our habit of car dependence. End of report. From my perspective, I had a couple of points regarding the parking strategy. I think it's, on the whole, really good and commendable. I was disappointed when I looked at the summary of feedback that I think a couple of really useful pieces of feedback that are provided were not included in that summary, so I'm going to provide them now. The first is that parklets have not been considered. I did ask for some images to be put up of what a parklet is, but the technology didn't work. So I'll describe it to you. You might have seen them in Wellington. It's where a parking space is converted either permanently or temporarily to another use. And in Wellington, they're mostly used for cafe and restaurant outdoor dining. So basically they build a platform, and it's a portable platform so it can be moved around, and you can put planter boxes on there to separate it and break the wind and so on and so forth, and tables and chairs. They've also been used for community gardens, they've been used for bike parking, all sorts of things. And it is a way of the future. Lots of cities are using them. And it would be a pity if you didn't future-proof your strategy by allowing for that. Otherwise, you'll end up in some interesting debates later where someone asks for it and you go, well, it's not in the strategy. What do we do? So that's the first point. And the second point was just around to build on what David said, that the policy in the beginning sections, the document talks really well about all modes of transport, and then by the time it gets to the rubber hitting the road section of the document, the part that you'll be referring to when making decisions, there's not enough consideration given to the fact that the road corridor also needs to support the safety of all road users. So, for example, it wouldn't be just about providing mobility parking, but safe ways for people to load and unload from those vehicles. That needs to be considered. And also users of bikes and other forms of active transport as well. I mean, there's times where crossing can't be put in a safe place because it would affect parking. Well, the policy needs to address scenarios like that. So I would just ask you to cast the net a little wider in your priorities and considerations for this policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jo. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question for Jo? No, I can't see that there are any. Thank you very much, and thank you on behalf of David for speaking on behalf of David as well. Yeah, thank you. Okay, next item of our agenda is conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to items on today's agenda. Are there any conflicts? Councillor Brown, kia ora. You're on mute there, Councillor. I'm going to guess that you're declaring a conflict with Urban Plus Limited. Please raise your hand if this is a correct guess. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can sort that microphone out, though, for the remainder of the meeting. Yeah. I guess what Deputy Mayor Lewis's hand is up for, but we'll see if her microphone's working too.
At Seaview Marina and also on the heritage policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then to our first agenda item, item number 5, recommendation to Council on 20th November 2024, 5A, Urban Plus Limited Statement of Expectations 2025-26. It's on page 8 of your agendas, and I'll welcome Lucy Desrosiers, Head of Urban Development, to speak to the report. Kia ora, Lucy.
Kia ora, councillors and Mr Chair. Some of you attended our workshop at the beginning of August with the board members of UPL, where we discussed the future direction for UPL. At the workshop, what we heard is that there was a general satisfaction with UPL's direction, but we identified a few opportunities for the future. And so the SOE reflects what we heard in these new opportunities. It builds on last year's SOE. We have 2 new priorities for UPL, and one is about supporting the council's broader strategies, so that's the IAF, the growth strategy, and Riverlink. And the other one is about future opportunities, and that's in relation to changes in central government kāinga or community housing providers. But otherwise, we've kept a similar direction, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lucy. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question? No, I think this one's pretty straightforward. Most councillors, as you said, were at the workshop and obviously pleased with what they can see in there today. So thank you, Lucy. I will move the motion on page 8 that the committee recommends that council approves the Urban Plus Limited Statement of Expectations 2025 to 2026 attached as Appendix 1 to the report. Mā wai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Dyer. Is there any debate? No, in which case I will put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against, please say no.
Councillor Mitchell, can I just ask a question? Sorry, I just left one system and went into my phone because the speaker's not working.
We've got your voice now, but not your picture. But yes, did you have a question?
My question, well, it's we're in debate now, so I just want to note that the top priorities, one of them is around social housing and Māori outcomes. It just needs to be noted that both of those are more challenging while we don't know what central government plans are for social housing. Part of Urban Plus core work is to partner with social housing and community housing providers, but they may be no longer, and there isn't the opportunities at the moment. So that needs to sit as potentially having to be amended at some point if what government announces doesn't align with community housing and social housing.
Thank you for your comment there, Councillor Brown. We have put the motion already, I think.
Yep. So I'll just say that's my...
Thank you. We're just allowing you to catch up there. Yeah, thank you. He whakapuaki au kua mana te mōtini. I declare that motion carried. Item B, Seaview Marina Limited Statement of Expectations 2025 to 2026. It's on page 15 of your agenda. I'll invite Brad Cato, our Chief Legal Officer, also Tim Lidgard, Chief Executive of Seaview Marina Limited, and Peter Steele, who we have online to speak to this report. Kia ora, Brad. Kia ora, Tim, and kia ora, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Apologies from Jenny and Darren, who were primarily involved in putting this paper together. They had a conflicting appointment, so they've asked me to step into the breach for them. I don't have too much to say or draw your attention to. It's very similar to the other statement of expectations. I'm not sure if Tim has anything he wants to particularly draw your attention to.
Nothing further, Mr. Chairperson, from my side.
Thank you, Tim. Any comment from you, Peter?
No, this is really follows the format set from last year. There's a little bit of uncertainty around the purchase of the breakwater and how that might happen and any resulting effect to the dividend. Those two are inextricably linked, and the new statement of intent reflects that.
Thank you, Peter. With that, he pātai tō member. Does any member have a question? Can't see any questions there. I have one small suggestion to the wording on page 18. There's under the climate section there, there's an A and a B, and under B it says SML should develop a factual understanding of sea level change and the performance of the breakwaters in relation to this. I just wondered, in addition to breakwaters, it could say breakwaters and other marina infrastructure, just so we're thinking about something a bit bigger than just the breakwaters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just getting to the recommendation. So we're recommending to council that we approve the statement of expectations. So maybe that could be something to put to council to approve, because it looks like we're going to have a final version of this. So this might be the only opportunity to make that change. It seems like a very sensible change to me, unless anyone from Seaview Marina Limited has a different view.
It's fine from our side.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will move the motions on page 15 that the committee recommends that council, 1, receives and notes the information, and 2, approves the Seaview Marina Limited Statement of Expectations 2025 to 2026, attached as Appendix 1 to the report, with that one amendment, which we can write down between meetings if we need to do that. Yep. Thank you. Mawai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. Is there any debate? No. I will now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Ka whakapuaki au, kua mana te mōtini. I declare that motion carried. Thank you very much. We're going to have the same crew speak to us on the next paper, which is an adoption of a new Seaview Marina Limited constitution. This is item C on page 21 of the agenda. I'll just hand it over to Brad and Co if there's anything you'd like to say about this particular paper.
Mr. Chair, not too much. You'll see from the paper that the current constitution has been there since 1997, and it's attached. And similar to the exercise Urban Plus did not so long ago, this new constitution just, I guess, reflects more modern practice and what Seaview Marine is about now. And you'll see it's been a while in train since about 2017, I think. So it's the culmination of a few years of getting it together now, and it's pretty standard. I didn't have too much more to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question? No. In that case, I will move the motion on page 21 of the agenda that the committee recommends that Council 1 approves and adopts a new constitution for Seaview Marina Limited, attached as Appendix 2 to the report, and 2, notes the recent refinements made to the proposed constitution. Mawai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Is there any debate? No. I will now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Ka whakapuaki au, kua mana te mōtini. I declare the motion carried. Moving on now to item 6, recommendation to Council 10 December 2024, parking strategy. It's on page 58 of the agenda, and I'll invite Richard Hardy, our Head of Strategy and Policy, to speak to the report.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we've also got Paul Hutt, who's the Head of Transport, who will be responsible for implementing said parking strategy. So the purpose of today's report is to present the committee with the results of our community engagement and the design strategy for your approval. The engagement ran from 16th of September to the 4th of October, and we received 186 responses to that. I mean, parking is clearly a topic that presents a range of views, and it is clear that there are people feel there are competing priorities, and we see that in the responses that came through. We saw very strong support for accessible and inclusive access parking, and you'll see in the report there was quite low support for demand-based user-pays parking models and not increasing the number of spaces. We even had some suggestions for more parking buildings in the city as well. So there's a range of views that come through, and of course then the speaker today, Joe Clendon, raised some other issues around things like parklets and stuff, which feed into the notion of urban design, good transport infrastructure and things like that. We remind you that the strategy is a high-level toolbox that aligns with and is intended to align with various other strategies and strategies and priorities that we've already identified through other documents like the long-term plan, sustainable growth strategy, and our integrated transport strategy. Things like mode shift, emission reduction, city livability, urban design, these are all things that need to be considered when we're thinking about parking. So in paragraph 8 of the report, you'll note that we've the updates that we've made following your feedback. We've also reviewed the feedback from that came from the public during our consultation process, and we feel that parking management plans are still the right model for being able to consider and addressing concerns about parking and objectives in relation to specific areas around the city. These parking management plans will take into account things like the priorities of the integrated transport strategy, things about modernising urban design, really good points that were raised by the public speaker early on. And as such, we feel that the objectives don't need to change. Our objectives are pretty clear in the strategy around mode shift, or encouraging mode shift, around accessible parking and other priorities that we need to consider. In terms of parking management plans, the transport team is looking to initiate parking management plans next year, trying to get a couple done each year in targeted areas, looking to potentially test drive, and I'm looking at Paul to make sure I get this right, Nainai and Taita potentially as first cabs off the rank, because we know, as the speaker earlier highlighted, there are some challenges around increasing population densities and people coming into some of those areas. So happy to take any questions, and that's, kia ora.
Thank you. Paul, do you have anything you'd like to add at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. The only other thing to add is, it may come up, is we are cognizant also of Petone, and we have made a commitment to do a review of the parking in Petone as well, subsequent to paid parking being implemented. That may not fall strictly into a parking management plan, but we do want to engage with businesses and so forth around Petone with respect to loading bays, mobility parking, subsequent to commitments that have been made.
Thank you very much. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question? Deputy Mayor Lewis and then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I don't know if you've got the same question, Simon. I'll go for the one I don't think you've got. On page 61, just in the reflections, percentages of people coming back with agree, disagree. It's just in the objective there, the very bottom, what the meaning is. Support social wellbeing suggests opportunities for wider social engagement. What would that be a parklet?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think it's making sure that when we are considering through our parking management plans, parking in particular areas, that we are considering wider aspects, not just the relationship of parking to shopping and things, but also the opportunity to potentially utilise spaces for things like parklets, for mixed mode use and things like that. So yes, it's extending it beyond just that relationship between a car and a car park to wider wellbeing issues.
Councillor Edwards.
I could be misreading something, or perhaps there's an error here, but on page 59 in the officer summary it says, and I was really heartened to see it too, that 52% agreed with encouraging mode shift and support use of public transport and cycling, and then I go to 61 in the survey results and that seems to be 28% agree to it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, sorry, I've just got to compare that. So this is, so paragraph 7, item D, agreed that parking management supports quality urban design.
On paragraph 7C,
52%
agree, really cool to see, but in the actual survey results, 28%. On page 61. I could be reading it wrong.
Oh, yes, sorry, that is a typo. I apologise for that.
All good. My second question, look, I'm really pleased to see the priority for how we do assessments when we do these traffic management plans, safety, then property access, then footpaths, then public transport cycling, finally vehicle parking. And I guess it's the same question that Dr. Tripp had. When we look at tricky areas like the Nainai and Taita that you're talking about, we've got those congested streets, or I think of Marina Grove, which Councillor Barrett will be very familiar with, or when we move from Knights Road to Waterloo Road. We've got the strategy, that's the priority in our strategy. Does that lessen the need to consult? I mean, that's what our strategy is, that's what's going to be the priority, so we don't have to worry so much about extended consultation processes with the community about whether they want to see parking left there or that kind of thing. We just follow our strategy.
No, we'll still absolutely need to consult with the public when we undertake any of these parking management plans. Particularly, that will help us understand the use of the area as well, as officers will have ideas about how it might be used, but the practicalities of day-to-day living in the area we wouldn't necessarily know. So we absolutely will be consulting with the public on these.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I think what it does also enable is that when we develop those parking management plans, we're starting from a much more strategic and informed perspective, so that when we do go out for engagement, we have taken into account those objectives and those strategic objectives first, and then that means that we're having a much more informed conversation with the community affected.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I've got a question more generally about the engagement results, and just wondering if you had any anecdotal feedback looking at a few of them. I'm quite surprised by the responses we got. Like, just take the principle on maximising public safety. Only 62% of people thought public safety was important. I was quite surprised by that. And there was a few others that I was quite surprised with the data. Just wondering if anecdotally you had noticed from the data there was only a sample of 100 and something, so it's quite a small sample. So that may be the answer. But was there a group of people that were quite being driven down a path, and that's kind of why some of these answers are just a bit strange?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I like the pun, Councillor Dyer, driven down the path. Very good. We haven't done a full demographic analysis of the results, but as you say, they're quite, we haven't got a huge number that came through, but we're expecting when we go into parking management plans that we'll have much higher input from those communities. It's not surprising that we get those results. Parking is one of those issues that people tend to respond to based on gut feeling or the inconvenience that they've experienced in a parking space in any city. So it's very hard to get a balanced and objective view, but it's important to help inform, and one of the things that these results will do, particularly when we look at some of the lower results, like around using existing parking rather than increasing the number of spaces and things, it does give us a good indication of where we do need to focus our engagement and our messaging to be clear that people understand priorities and objectives that we've already agreed to.
Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora. Just reflecting on the fact that commuter parking is prioritised as low on both residential and non-residential areas. Thinking, have we directly contacted Greater Wellington Regional Council and got their comments on that? Because that is going to put some of the onus, particularly on people who are using park and ride.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so Greater Wellington has been working with us in both the development of the strategy, but also in providing feedback on the strategy. We know that they are considering a different approach to parking in and around major train hubs and things, potentially the possibility of paid parking and stuff. So we are quite closely in conversation with them about that. They've also raised concerns about, as we develop parking management plans, being cognizant of potential overflow into residential areas and commuter areas. So yes, we are in conversation with them. Paul, do you want to add anything else? No. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
I have one question, but I've got two questions now. My first question is, you've in the report it says that you're reprioritising the EV stations. Does that just mean that it's gone from that high to medium? And with mode shift, where the EV stations are, chargers are not being used, so Wainui is one of them. I've only ever seen it being used by Hutt work cars. Is it possible that by the time that we get that mode shift that they might be out of date and it might be a different focus? And my second question is around the commuter. For Wainui, it has no direct bus to town for, I bang on about it, population of 22,000, and their encouragement is to use the train. And the buses very often do not match up, so a large population use cars. Is that on their agenda to look at paid parking for the people that drive their cars specifically to the station, or is that residential changes around the station.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are you referring, Councillor Brown, to Greater Wellington Regional Council's plans for the future? I'm afraid I can't speak in detail to that. They're still working on those. They've just indicated that there is work underway to think about the future of car parking around those major transport hubs. In terms of mode shift, I think the what we've tried to do with the strategy is to, in that toolbox, build in the flexibility. So as things do change and evolve over time, we'll be able to either come back and revisit it like we will every 5 years for any strategy review, and take into account the way that things are evolving. But I think we've been pretty clear that, or you've been pretty clear through long-term planning and strategic advice to us that the shift to trying to encourage cycling and walking and electric vehicles is a priority, at least in the short to medium term, and this will account for that.
Thank you.
Mayor Barry.
Excuse me, just if it's helpful, I know that the Regional Council are looking at the park and ride locations on whether they become charged. So I think that's what they'll be considering, Councillor Brown, just to help with that.
Yep.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Just clarification on the parking management plan on page 86. I think it's the final document. They're developed in consultation, with residents and things like that. Is one of our tools in the toolkit going to be residential parking areas? Because I can't see it anywhere.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. Yes, in the document we do talk about one of the tools that's available in the parking management plans is establishing resident-only parking areas.
Councillor Parkin.
Would it be possible to actually have a meeting and briefing and discussion with Greater Wellington around their plans? Because I think that actually our encouraging mode shift, Councillor Brown raises a really good point. If you don't have good transport to get to public transport and are forced to use your vehicle to get there and then can't park, it raises some really interesting questions, especially if they're going to then start charging people to use the car parks. I think that's actually quite counterproductive and would be really good for us to have that discussion. I'm sure Greater Wellington could do something in terms of linking paid park and ride with the tickets to validate parking, but I think introducing paid is not a good idea. I suspect that my fellow councillors will have other ideas, and it would be good to have that discussion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's out of scope with our current strategy and what we're signing off today, but as that conversation develops, they've committed to working through the different councils, because it's not just our council that's affected. Porirua and Wellington will also be affected. So when we hear more, we will keep you updated as to what's happening in that space.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Tupou, joining us online. We are on the parking strategy, item 6. Councillor Tupou, if you have any questions to add to the pot, we've had quite a few already, but if you have any questions on that paper, just to give you time to think about that, I'll just raise something myself. And it's coming back to the public comment and comments from Dr. Tripp. And one of the things he talked about was allocation of road space. And I think, as Councillor Edwards noted, that is in here, albeit briefly, that we will prioritise safety, then property access, then footpaths, then public transport over the provision of vehicle parking. The other issue he seemed to be raising was the absence of cycle parking in this strategy. And there is a disclaimer in here that bicycles and micro-mobility devices have not been included in this strategy, as parking for them is generally provided for in off-street spaces, i.e. on footpaths. There are other cities, and Wellington is one where you can see that they've taken decisions to remove car parking and put bike parking in on the street, presumably because of lack of space on footpaths or other areas there. So they have been taking that decision to remove car parking and put bike parking on the street. I wonder in this strategy, how would we deal with a situation like that when the strategy is silent on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would be managed through the parking management plan. There is nothing to stop parks being removed. If there is through the parking management plan, there is an opportunity to reimagine a particular space. It could be spelled out in more detail, but I think in terms of the principles of what we're trying to encourage, it is covered off there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is covered in the principles and it could be spelled out more clearly. I wonder if in the parking management plan section, it could explicitly state that consideration of bike parking and micromobility parking be included in that thinking for a neighbourhood, particularly if we're going to come through and do it neighbourhood by neighbourhood, as you suggested. And, you know, just reflecting on Nainai, which you mentioned, we built a new community centre. We didn't provide any bike parking for that one. The pool, I believe, is going to have some. So part of it for me is like, what are our drivers to provide bike parking kind of separately and alongside this vehicle parking? And if it's not in this strategy, if we can't see it in there, then there's no kind of driver for us to even really consider it. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll look at updating the wording in the parking management plan section.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tupou, did you have any questions on this paper before we move on?
Not right at this moment, Mr. Chair, but just noting and thanking the committee for the feedback, particularly around the need to have, where there are spaces and places like Nainai Pool, or indeed Queen Street, Waitemata, where there are multiple services being accessed, be it a swimming pool or community hub, that businesses are also having access, or the customers are also able to access businesses. So I think as we come into these high user sort of peak hour times, ensuring that we have sufficient parking across for the multimodal approach of not just vehicles, but the mobility spaces that you've mentioned as well.
Thank you. Are there any more questions before we move on? No, I can't see any. Oh, sorry, John would like to comment. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora, Chair and councillors. Just on the Greater Wellington comments by Councillor Parkins. So they're working through about $130 million funding gap in the NLTP and looking at options to fund essential services. The work on whether they charge for park and ride has been ongoing for a couple of years. I know it's been looked at quite closely in Auckland as well as here, but part of that is also the amount of short journeys that people are driving to the train station and taking trains or using the park and ride for anything other than catching public transport. So, but there was some work done a couple of years ago, which and I don't remember the percentage, but the number of people who drove for what was less than or equal to like a 15-minute walk to the train station was very high. So there's a piece around connecting transport, public transport services, but there's also a piece around, you know, encouraging mode shift, making sure people can walk or bike safely, but then having the storage for bikes at train stations as well. So it's kind of it's a bigger picture thing with multiple different elements.
Thank you, John. All right, I think I will move the motion on page 58 that the committee recommend that Council 1 notes on 1 October 2024, Council approve the draft parking strategy for public engagement. Number 2 notes the results of public engagement attached as attachment 1 to the report. Number 3 considers any required changes following community feedback. And number 4 approves the final design version to the parking strategy attached as attachment 2 to the report, just noting there has been 1 or 2 suggestions for officers to consider before it does come through to Council on the 10th of December. Mawai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Is there any debate? Councillor Edwards.
Other than to say I very much welcome this strategy. I think it's sound, notwithstanding the liaison, as Chris and Councillor Brown has mentioned, there needs to be some thought, we'll need dialogue with Greater Wellington as they make their moves and so on. But I think it drives home the message that road space is valuable. You don't own the road space outside your house. Clear out your garages, clear out your driveways, get your cars parked there because there's other uses for that road space. I particularly welcome this strategy because there's a very strong emissions reduction and mode shift theme to it. And I think we've got to get cracking on that.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Brown.
Kia ora. I support the strategy too. I think it's it puts a standard across the city so that wherever we're considering changes around parking, it has that same position and principles no matter where it is. So it gives a level of surety across the city. The challenge is if we lift it up to its pure outcomes is that this is a reduction and it's environmental and also that people can get around the city easier by reducing the amount of cars. Where I think our struggle is that a core linchpin of that is public transport. And that because of our intersect with Greater Regional Council and their responsibilities, the element, and I raise it again, of people having to get a bus. And for some in Wainuiamata, that would be, if you do the whole scene, not just from the hill, 3/4 of an hour to the train station, hope it links up, and then get a train into town and then soon have to pay for it. That's not our problem, but that's a consideration. The plan, it's going to have to join up at some time because that's not a mode shift. People will just start taking their cars again. So, but I really support the strategy that we've got.
Thank you very much. Any further comment? Just a quick one from me. Really important to have this strategy in place to remind ourselves as we plan what we're doing around our city, what our priorities are and how we'll approach our planning, and also to remind our community what those priorities are as we move forward. So thank you to the officers for the work that's been put into this. I will now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. He whakapuaki au kua mana te mōtini, I declare that motion carried. Moving on to item 7, it's a Heritage Grant Fund changes on page 92 of the agenda, and I'll invite Rachel Holbrook, Policy Lead, to speak to the report. Kia ora, Rachel.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report incorporates the feedback from this committee. It also incorporates feedback from the engagement that we undertook. So we wrote to 301 heritage property owners. We received 23 responses. We also engaged with mana whenua through Kahui mana whenua. We have engaged with them twice, and we received support from through the Kahui. They are supportive of trialling targeted support for sites and areas of cultural significance. So if this proposal is approved, the next step would be to trial it for 12 months and then come back to see the impact of that trial. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. He pātai tō ngā mema. Does any member have a question? Deputy Mayor Lewis and Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you for the report and the paper, the actual funding policy. It looks really good. There's so much information in there for people. I just wondered, with the trial, will the people you sent submissions to get notification of that trial and the information, they've got this much time to give it a test run?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, in terms of implementation, very much that the thinking is that we would have a targeted application period that would give us the ability to be able to promote what's available more effectively than perhaps we have in the past.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thank you for the report. And I might have missed it in earlier discussion about this, but is that a new criteria when we're talking about who is eligible for some of the things that we're offering to go beyond those buildings listed by Historic Places Trust and listed on our district plan to buildings identified by a council-approved registered heritage advisor as contributing to a heritage area. I'm aware of heritage inventories done in the past by such registered advisors, really quite extensive. And given our relatively modest amount available, 150,000 a year, aren't we in danger if we open it up really wide like this to basically running out of money?
I don't think the intention is to open it more widely than it is at the moment, but the intention is to promote it better. That does open up the possibility that we'll get more applications, but presumably that gives us the ability to then make sure we allocate the funding.
So sorry, already our fund is available to buildings beyond those that are listed on our district plan and by the Heritage, the Historic Places Trust.
I'm not actually completely certain of the answer to that. I'd need to check and come back to you. Sorry.
Thank you. Just as a quick follow-up question, if we are expanding it and we have our Category 1 list from Historic Places New Zealand and we have our own list and then we have a third grouping, would it be prudent to prioritise within the guidelines here that we will prioritise those higher valued properties? Kia ora, Nathan. Welcome to the table. And you might have a response. First to Councillor Edwards. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I might not be able to fully answer your question, but I can provide you some information with regard to contributing buildings within heritage areas for the district plan review. Part of the proposed district plan that's currently in development is the identification of new heritage areas, and within that there will be identified contributing buildings, and this would ensure that those contributing buildings that have been identified through the district plan would have access, I suppose, in the same way as a heritage building that is outside of a heritage area. I can't comment on how that currently works under the existing funder.
Thank you for that information, Deputy Mayor Lewis.
I'm in the same area as well on page attachment 303. And just the terminology there of any application for a non-heritage listed building or a modern alteration to a heritage listed building. It's just that most heritage listed buildings are, you wouldn't do a modern alteration unless it's I don't know what that actually means. It's just a bit confusing. Is there an example of it perhaps somewhere? Or have you got something you could example it, a modern alteration?
Through you, Mr. Chair, these edits came from our planning team, and I am assuming they were seeking clarification to ensure that they could implement, this could be implemented effectively. The aim, obviously, with the policy is conserving heritage values. It's not about modernising heritage buildings. So we can look to tighten that wording to make sure that confusion isn't there.
Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, was there any thinking in the criteria of limiting it just to privately owned buildings? I'm thinking of the likes of, having seen the draft list of what's coming, there's a lot of publicly owned buildings in there. Take the Hutt Hospital, for instance. They could suck up that 150k in one application. Was there any thinking around maybe just limiting it to more residential-based applications, or are we comfortable leaving it open to all the train stations that are in there, all that kind of stuff?
If I can maybe help short circuit things in relation to both cases, I can think of modern additions to a heritage building might be, for example, for disability access. Think about much widened spaces to get in, and in terms of the criteria, we were anticipating that, for example, there might be mana whenua type buildings, but we won't be subsidising the state sector in relation to that. So yeah. Rest assured that's not on the list.
That's kind of what I thought, but it's nothing I need to say we won't. I just wonder whether it's worth adding something.
Common sense.
Thank you. Just another question from me, Rachel. There is a section in here about fees we will waive, resource consent fees, building consent fees if necessary. Those fees will be waived. We have a pot of money in this fund. When we waive fees, will we be taking money from the fund to cover those fees? Is that the intention of how it will work?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think the fund covers that. I think that funding comes out of the process that is normally undertaken through the resource consent team.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So just to come back on one previous question, there's no changes principally to the eligibility proposed in these revisions. So in terms of what's already available to property owners, the existing funding is the criteria is the same. So the existing funding application prioritises buildings registered by the Historic Places Trust or relate to buildings listed in the district plan or identified by a Hutt City approved registered heritage advisor. So there's no changes between the existing funding settings and what's proposed in these changes. In terms of the funding question, because we want this to be principally financially neutral and not contribute to any further budgeted issues, the 150,000 proposed that would offset any resource consenting fees would be paid for from the fund to ensure that it wasn't actually dragging on any other operational budgets.
Thank you. That's what I assumed. Just wanted to check that one. The only other piece of commentary I have on this one is that I know that this is the guidelines that will sit behind some comms from our team and on our website as well. But just within this guideline document, I can't see anywhere where it states the pool of funding that is available, the 150,000. And as Councillor Edwards noted, there may be a bit of pressure on that pool. I may have overlooked it, but I'm just noting that. Are there any further questions? Councillor Stellinger?
Yes, I'm not quite sure how to put this, but I do have a concern about 6A, and it's really because of particular that hasn't been resolved at this point. It's all being considered. It's not so much outcome of that particular project, but more I was looking to see that as perhaps an example of how effective our policies were at addressing concerns that perhaps more than one property owner may have. I think it's probably a bigger issue that's extends a bit beyond the grant fund itself, given the limited capacity of it. Some councillors will be aware of the one I'm talking to, but perhaps I won't name the property. But just a couple of facts, though. I mean, it's a restored building. I'm not actually clear on the heritage status at the moment in terms of its listing. I think what I was told by the owner differs from the situation, but the position that the family are in is that the annual rates will be 15,000. It's a large piece of land in a valuable area, and I think people would hold the property in high regard, people beyond the family that live in it. Now, my concern is that having heard from the gentleman who asked to meet with me a couple of months ago and explained it, I don't see how he can economically sustain being in the heritage property, and if it was possible for him, he'd probably be in a position of having to either demolish or and put multiple homes there, or else just sell. I also had to give him the bad news that at the end of our LTP period, he'd be looking at a rate spoil of something like $40,000 a year. So it's just, I don't mean to kind of dwell too much on that individual circumstance, but my concern is with 6A, and I know it's possibly only allows a small remission relative to this issue and that property I mentioned, but I'm not sure what we can do in circumstances like that if we are really concerned to protect a property such as this one, because the rates are just not affordable if the property is to be retained. So I feel I'm in the position where I can't really vote for 6A, even though I don't know that that's the solution to this individual problem. So I'm just wondering if there's any advice or comments the officers can provide in relation to circumstances such as this one. And is there anything we can do, or it's just something we're stuck with?
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify, when Councillor Stellander mentioned 6A, you're talking about recommendation 6A, which is to discontinue the rates remission
sorry.
mechanism. Thank you.
Yeah, not property in 6A in a certain street.
Through,
pardon.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm aware of the example you're talking about. My understanding is that that's not a heritage listed property, so it is being considered for rates remission under the standard policy. The rates remission policy remains unchanged, and so officers who administer the rates remission policy continue in discussions with that particular property owner. So this is not material to that particular example.
Follow up I can. So if the policy was ceased, then if the property was granted a remission, that remission would stop. I mean, they may be granted a remission, but it might be, say, for 1 year, and once this new policy is implemented, that would put an end to it, I'm assuming.
So that property is not a heritage listed property, therefore it's not affected by this at all.
If I could just ask you, Rachel, to remind us why the recommendation was made to shift from rates remissions to funding the actual work that's required. It's there in paragraph 11, spoiler alert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, you're right. In paragraph 11, only one application has been granted for rates remission for a heritage listed property to date. And on reflection, I think possibly it's more that this is shifting away from promoting rates remission, the rates remission policy for heritage protected properties. The rates remission policy itself and the mechanism remains in place unchanged. So it's more that we're pulling back from the promotion of it through this heritage grant fund, I think, on reflection.
And I think too, from when this was presented to us at an earlier meeting in July, there had been feedback from heritage building owners that this more practical support for doing work to their buildings was actually what they valued over and above just getting a discount on their rates. Is that right? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Stellander, did you have anything further?
I'll make a comment when we get to that, to the debate, but I just wonder whether, if that's the case, it's just been explained, that perhaps the wording of 6A gives a somewhat different impression. If we're really talking about not promoting the rates remission as a heritage grant fund matter, then maybe recommendations should state that rather than just say we're discontinuing.
Yeah, could we just get a little bit more clarity around that? My understanding was that we were going to discontinue the rates remission specifically for heritage, and that maybe you were talking about rates remissions in general when you were saying that they're being considered anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rates remission are completely undertaken under the rates remission policy. They're not actually dealt with directly through the Heritage Grant Fund. So there is just a degree of confusion here, I think, which we need to consider.
Can anyone clarify then what is meant by recommendation 6A to discontinue the rates remission mechanism?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the proposal under these changes is to discontinue rates remissions for heritage listed properties. So one of the things that's noted in the financial considerations of this report and has been briefed to elected members previously is effectively the significant fiscal risk that exists with the rates remission scheme for heritage properties. So part of the changes was to respond to what we understand to be more practical assistance that can be provided through resource consenting waivers and some changes to criteria and eliminating what is effectively an unfunded and substantial fiscal risk for council through the provision of a rates remission for heritage properties.
Thank you, Jared. Councillor Dyer, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I thought it was clear, but I think Jared's just made it more confusing. So we are amending our rates remission policy as part of this recommendation, because I thought you said we were not touching that, but Jared's just said under the rates remission policy, we would remove the historic section. So
Yes, that's the intention, and there may be further further consultation that's required on the rates remission policy, working with finance on that, but that's a decision that's been sought from elected members under 6A of the recommendations.
Cool. So, because currently you can get a rates remission under the heritage policy, you can also get a rates remission under our rates remission policy. Are we saying we will remove it from both?
Sorry, no, I understand your question now. No, so what we're saying through this is specifically, and this goes back to Rachel's point, specifically in relation to the heritage policy and grant funding setting. So this doesn't represent or reflect any substantial changes to the rates remissions policy, but does close that avenue as part of what is effectively the heritage funding package and as part of the heritage work. So I think it's kind of that's the source of the confusion.
I think, can I just clarify very simply, we're removing it from the grant fund as an option, but it still will be available as a remission through our remission policy. But the intent is to also remove it as a remission, but that will be a decision for a future council because it would need to go through another process.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think 6A does need to be changed because it does confuse. So we can get some words on that, I think.
It is specifically 6 agreeing to propose changes to the Heritage Grant Fund and only the Heritage Grant Fund.
I would just say remove the rates remission mechanism from, rather than discontinue gives the impression that it's, I think it's a fair
Mr. Chair, if we change that to 6A, remove the rates remission mechanism from the Heritage Grant Fund, that covers it, I would suggest.
Thank you. We've got it noted down as such now. Councillor Dyer, are you free of questions for now?
Yeah, the bit I get confused with is the rationale for that is because it says this is managed through our rates remission policy, which is sounding like we are then going to change this. Not quite lining up for me. The reason we're changing this is because it's managed over here, but we're also saying, hey, we're going to take it out of there as well. This doesn't quite line up for me. But if the intention is to completely remove it from both, then I think we almost just make that decision now.
All we're discussing today is the Heritage Grant Fund and the guidelines which are in front of us as how to that fund will operate. As Mayor Barry noted, any changes to the rates remission policy will be dealt with separately. Councillor Parkin, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I think my question actually stems to the rates remission fund and the risk that Jared has mentioned. I think we could much more effectively deal with that by actually putting a cap on it, but that's for another day. My question would be, could we deal with it by putting a cap?
Is that a question you're looking for a response to? Could we deal with it by...
I'm happy if that just sits on the table and we deal with that another day because it's not the point.
All right, are there any further questions? If not, I'll just see if we can get the recommendations up on the screen with an amended 6A, which I think that are the words that were spoken by the Chief Executive. Too big now. The 6A, remove the rates remission mechanism from the Heritage Grant Fund, just to be clear that it's just applying to this fund and not to the rates remission policy. Is everybody happy with that? The other recommendations are all as per in the paper. Yeah. So I will move those recommendations. They were on page 92 with that amended 6A. Mawai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor, is there any? No, I think we got that everyone is happy with. So I will put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Ka whakapuakio, kua mana te mōtini. I declare that motion carried. Moving right along to item 8, an update on Tō Tātou Taone 2055, our city 2055. This is on page 111 of the agenda, and I'll invite Amy Prebble, Principal Advisor City Strategy, to speak to the report. Kia ora, Amy.
Kia ora koutou. This paper provides an update on the development of Tō Tātou Taone, our city 2055, a future-focused strategy for our city. We introduced this project to this committee in September. This paper provides insights from the Lower Hutt City Summit and information on the City Leadership Group. On 18th of September, over 200 people attended the inaugural Lower Hutt City Summit. A summary of feedback provided in the attached insights report. We've also prepared a more detailed report which covers major topics such as health, education and climate change. And these reports are being sent to elected members and City Summit participants. Wider engagement on Tō Tātou Taone 2055, our city 2055, is currently underway, with key stakeholder interviews and hui taking place until Christmas. Our website on the city strategy is also being launched this month. This includes a platform for the community to share thoughts and insights and help shape the development of the strategy. This is a city strategy. It's not just a council strategy. It's important that we have wide buy-in, including from organisations who can support positive and long-term change in the city. We are intending to establish a city leadership group, which will include key local leaders of anchor organisations that are deeply embedded in our city and who are going to have significant roles in delivering the city strategy. This includes mana whenua, business, education, health, and social services. The leadership group will provide a forum to agree priorities and drive action on the strategy. And the terms of reference for the leadership group are attached. If the committee agrees, then membership of the leadership group will be confirmed at a mayor and chairs meeting in December, and a process will be put in place for reaching out to potential members. We'll provide the next update on the city strategy in the new year. Kia ora.
Thank you, Amy. He pātai tō ngā mema. Are there any questions? Councillor Morgan.
Kia ora, thanks. This is really exciting. With the membership of the CLG group, I'm just wondering, it does talk about linking with other organisations, but I was wondering if there's a space in that very important group for rangatahi voice and the disabilities voice as well, given that, you know, they were forefront in leading this launch, and the comments were, you know, remarkable about our young speaker and their insight, and we've seen what's happening, you know, around the world with our young leaders leading the nation and in different spaces. So I'd really love to see if there was a space for them in this piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, absolutely. At the City Summit, rangatahi were front and centre, which is wonderful, and obviously too, communities dealing with disabilities was also an important part of the City Summit. So within the City Leadership Group, there are other organisations and community representatives as determined by the City Leadership Group. So at the Mayor and Chair's meeting, I'm sure that will be discussed, and I think it's a really valuable point, and there is that flexibility to bring in wider community involvement. So we'll definitely pass that on. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown.
Councillor Mitchell, are we going to have chance to discussion, or is it just questions?
We'll be debating this paper as we
Oh, yeah.
do every
I'll wait
paper.
for that. Okay, thanks.
Okay, are there any questions before we move into debate? No? No further questions? No, in that case, thank you, Amy. I will move the recommendations on page 111 of the agenda. I won't read them all out, they're quite long, but mawai e tautoko, do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Morgan, thank you. Is there any debate? Councillor Brown.
Oh, sorry.
We'll take that
Thank
as a
you.
yes, there is debate.
Kia ora, and thank you. And thank you for the work that's been done so far. This is going to be a massive machine, you know, a very large piece of work. But I would be remiss in not saying, I think you did really well to get where you got to with that strategic questions that were asked at the summit. I didn't see them as strategic at all. So it's a struggle how you came up with what you came up with, particularly around looking back and looking forward and what would our grandchildren think us for. To me, that's a couple of levels down. I think there's and maybe there's going to be more hui, and I really hope there is, because we haven't really covered off, in my mind, the bigger outcomes that we want for the city. And I know some of you will be thinking that'll be up to the city leaders. But even with the city leaders, there's local government, there's central government in there with MSD and the likes and health, who probably need to be in there. But then there's other central government too, if we're going to bring them in, around housing, police. And then it gets to be a big, large group of direction. I really believe there needs to be some more setting around the wellbeing outcomes of people, of the environment, and some business outcomes. We've got this opportunity around Riverlink in having some real clear outcomes of we want to be a business or innovative and dynamic city that attracts new business. And if we set those outcomes, and that links to what our focus is going forward, even in the people wellbeing outcomes, because there's a lot of statements in here that some of them are principles and they're sitting in the themes, and I understand it because it would have been quite difficult to get the statements out of those notes. But if we haven't got the overall broad outcomes towards business, environment, and people, and that's that all people are thriving. I mean, I can't speak for it, but we, you know, live in a place where we have people are nurtured, they can train, and we have good employment that covers the whole three. And then we talk about what the situation is now, because there is a lot of good things already in Te Awa Kairangi. And there was a question in there of, if we don't change now, what will we do, or something like that. There's a lot of good, and we don't want to have to go back and have this group, this, you know, which could turn into an audience of thousands, working on what is already working well and how we build on that, and what are our gaps, so that when we talk about environment, we are front-footing the climate change, and we are a city that front-foots it and has plans. I just felt like that was missing. So my hope is that there is another. Normally, everyone would say there's too much hui and not enough doi, and I see there's heaps of action there. But I think the strategic conversations, there needs to be some more filling out of that, just having themes in that. For me, it wasn't enough, but I really acknowledge all the work that's done.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Any further debate? No, just a few additional comments from me. Councillor Brown noting there is absolutely signalled further engagement with the community as this process moves forward, and just to acknowledge too the update document, the summary of the City Summit, as you noted there, to thank officers for feeding that back to participants in that summit. I think there was a lot of excitement in the room on that day. And yeah, personally, absolutely support a city leadership group carrying this work forward. Really good to see that we're relying on others to do a bit of the lifting on this one as well. Other important players in our city. So thanks again to the officers. I will now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. He whakapuaki au kua mana te mōtini, I declare that motion carried. Item number 9 is the Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee Forward Programme on page 125 of the agendas. He pātai tō ngā member. Does any member have a question about that? No. In that case, I will move the motion that the committee receives and notes the draft forward program for 2025, attached as Appendix 1 to the memorandum. Mā wai e tautoko. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. Is there any debate? I will now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. He whakapuaki au kua mana te mōtini. I declare that motion carried. Item number 7 is questions. I have received no questions. Closing formalities. Are we going to move straight into council or do we have to wait till 5:30? We'll take a break, come back at 5:30. We might as well close out this meeting then with the karakia. It's up on the screen. Karakia whakamutanga. Me karakia tātou unuhia, unuhia, unuhia I te urutapu nui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te arataka tū. Koe ara I rongo, whakaerehia, aki ki runga, kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia, hau, pai mā reri. I declare this